We're going live. Wait a few minutes. My name is Ian Hopfe. I'm an HR consultant and Indigenous Relations consultant. Today's topic is Indigenous Allyship, Indigenous EDI, Indigenous Relations, anything Indigenous concerning business in relation to your business and things like that. So everybody should be asking your questions in the comment right there. Ask them in the comments. I'm just gonna go and check to see how make sure I'm connected. First, are we connected on? Yes, we are connected on Facebook. Are we connected on LinkedIn? LinkedIn. Come on, LinkedIn. Where are you? Yeah, it looks like we're LinkedIn. It looks like we're going live on LinkedIn. Let's have a look at that. Yes. Yes, it's good. We're going to check on the YouTube. YouTube, yes, we are live. Show number 4. Excellent, excellent, excellent. So I have ambient music playing this morning. It's kind of weird. I might change this to chill. We've been doing atmosphere a whole lot. Maybe we should try chill. Let's see what chill is all about. Music changing. Some chill music. I guess this is chill. Let me know in the comments if that is too loud. I think that's the problem with some of these other stations. It feels like it's just too loud. I'm gonna turn it down just a little bit. Feels loud. It felt loud. Felt loud to me. And I have no idea what to talk about today. Indigenous Relations. Although we've got, I've gone over the basics on what a business should be doing in my previous lives, what you should be doing to connect and work with Indigenous communities. So what's next? So I had to swish around. I had some hibiscus tea just before this. So you always got to swish that hibiscus out of there or else it'll weaken your enamel. Just got an idea. Something we can go over. Let me just look up the document, see if I got something that'll cover that. Oh boy, can't find a document I'm thinking of. That's fine. I can keep searching. It's my life. If I would just want to sit here and sleep, and you guys watch me sleep and count my snores, well, then that's what we're gonna do. Because it's my life. It's not your life. Oh my, someone should prepare themselves before going live. I'm not naming names or trying to accuse anybody of anything. Just somebody. Is the same stuff we talked about last week, but I don't think we're gonna get the same value out of those. Oh, we're not gonna use that. About I could just go through this workshop I created, but I think maybe I might have a better version. So slow. Well, let's see if I can make this slideshow work. I have no idea. I should be able to do like a presentation mode or something, right? Then that took over my whole screen and it's completely useless. Oh my god. Oh my god. I want to just share the screen, but then I don't think it'll look good because this is just that's something. All right, let's try that. I managed to squish the screen down. Let's share this. We'll go through this presentation that I have created. See how it goes. That might work out just right. Maybe. Oh, that's interesting. Maybe over here. I think this is better. Let's you see more. Remember to ask your questions in the comments. I'll try to keep the chat window open so I can see if anything comes in. Worked pretty well from YouTube. Sorry I've been so quiet. Oh man, taking us over 10 minutes to get organized here. Let's look at this. This is a workshop I've developed based on Indigenous history and my lived experience. And we'll get through part of it. I don't know if we'll go through the whole thing today. Basically, it covers major Indigenous events. Be warned, use your mental health services to work through anything that might be that might affect you. Now, this particular version, I shortened it down for a 1 hour. My sister's here. Oh my God, thank you. This particular version of the workshop, I made it short. It's supposed to be about 45 minutes. And I made it for a client, Leadcore. And I'm going to be tweaking it. I don't think this is the final project. I gotta make some extra tweaks. The idea is I can get it done in an hour over lunchtime, like a lunch and learn, like something like this, and then I can what's the word I'm looking for? I can show it to other companies and organizations. Anyway, Indigenous history on Turtle Island. I'm here in Edmonton, and this is the traditional territory of the Papas Chase First Nations people, the Treaty 6 First Nations people, and the Métis Nation of Alberta Region 4 people. The picture says, as long as the sun shines, the grass grows, and the river flows. This was words that were enshrined in our treaties. And I say our treaties because if you live in Canada, you are a treaty person. You are bound by these treaties as much as the colonial government of Canada is. And so are the Indigenous governments of each First Nations. So let's talk pre-colonization. You know, this chill music just doesn't feel right for this presentation. Let's go back to, let's do the atmosphere. I think I'm enjoying that the most. It's a little weird now and again, but chill seems a little bit upbeat. There's no sad music I can find. That should be the changeover. I don't know. I can't hear it myself at this end, but anyway, should continue. So pre-colonization, we're talking about the land, the people, and the tech. Yes, Indigenous people had their own technology at this point. At this point, before colonization, the estimates are 30 to 150 million people lived in North America. So that includes Canada, US, Mexico, and I believe those numbers include all the Caribbean and the Central America countries and areas. So that's a lot of people. That's not a small amount of people. When you look at the size of their land mass, it means there's a very low population per square kilometer type thing, but it's still a lot of people. As we look at the population of Canada right now, I think we are about 40 million people in Canada. And the United States, I think, is at 340 or 380 million people. So half the population of the United States was already here, basically, when you're talking about numbers. Indigenous people had their own tools and technology to do the things they needed to do for hunting, for building shelters. All this stuff was developed based on the environment and what resources they had. Every First Nations had its own languages, cultures, traditions, laws, and governments. And that's what defined them as different nations. And this is how they connected with each other through the trade routes. There was agreements to create peace, and Indigenous people considered the land to be sacred. Elders and knowledge keepers were very important and were basically the leaders. These structures were all different based on the different groups, right? There are some language groups that are similar. My people, the Big Stone Cree Nation, our traditional language is Sakau Cree. It is a variant and a cross between Plains Cree and Woodland Cree. So because we're kind of in that region, Sakau actually means boreal forest. So it's boreal forest Cree. Sorry, had to cough. I don't know if there's any sound playing. I have no idea. I can't hear sound. I'm going to press the shuffle button, see if something else comes up. I can't hear no sound. I broke it. I must have broke the atmosphere. Let's go to ambient. Ambient. Come on, sound. Where's the sound? Oh, we should have just stayed with chill, I guess. Jeez. Can't win. Can't win. Turn that down a little bit. Seems like it's working. All right. So, and we talk about Two-Spirit. In a lot of nations, Two-Spirit people were given special roles because of their special nature. And, we try to honor these people and these roles, whether it's elders, knowledge keepers, Two-Spirit, right? Because they're special, they're different. And when I think about the land as being sacred, we think about how Indigenous people didn't believe in ownership, especially when things were built from nature, because nobody owns the land. That's a strange concept to traditional Indigenous cultures. How can you own the land? It's part of nature. It's not yours. It was there before you. It's going to be there for after you. It's not yours. You can use that nature to create things, create the tools, but a lot of times there's a ceremonial process to that, thanking the land, thanking the creators for giving us these tools, these resources. So think about that when we try to create treaties. We're going to talk about colonization now. This is about the 15th century. Europeans discovered indigenous lands, like we were lost, or there was no humans here to have already discovered it. Europeans made deals with themselves to split up the land, take control of the land. The Christian doctrine of discovery. If you find it, it's yours, basically, because you're bringing Christianity to the people. At this point, Indigenous peoples already possessed all the elements of nationhood with these laws, maybe not written, but the spoken history, the elders, the knowledge keepers, all protecting this way of life. It was already there. And absolutely at the start of colonization, Indigenous people way outnumbered Europeans. I do have actual notes on the slides that I could read. I've decided not to read them. I'm kind of going from memory, so I might be missing some stuff. Colonization. This is the treaties and 1763. European leaders recognized Indigenous peoples as independent nations. Treaties between Indigenous nations and the monarchs. So these were high-level treaties, nation to nation. The Europeans knew they could not force their laws on us. And this was early. This was early in the colonization process. So we had things like King George II of England recognizing Indigenous rights in the Royal Proclamation of 1763. Look at that date, 1763. Shortly after this, that the United States broke away from England. So part of the reason, yes, okay, rich people didn't want to pay taxes and they wanted to keep their slaves. But part of the reason for breaking away was also that the Royal Proclamation basically split the continent in half and said, this is as far as settlers can go. The rest of the territory is for the Indigenous people, the Indian lands. And the United States didn't like that. It's just another reason to break away from the British. After they broke away, the Indian Wars started in the United States, and Indigenous people became a conquered people because the federal government needed land for settlers to expand west. In Canada, when the government of Canada was established, the Royal Proclamation remained in effect The Royal Proclamation said if a colonial government is to expand or try to get more territory, they must negotiate with the Indigenous people, hence the treaties. So in Canada, we had a treaty system, not a conquered people system. Oh, there's this, like, a lot of this is Canva generated. I just love this one. This is not a real representation of what an Indigenous market would look like. It is just fun that the AI created this. It looks like a Middle Eastern bazaar, except it's a bunch of Indigenous people in there. I'm just like, it was just too funny the way it created. I kept it. It's not appropriate. It's not accurate in any way, shape, or form. But I found it very entertaining, so I kept it. And we're going to talk about the Métis Nation. Indigenous women married European men. These men learned the Indigenous ways. This became an actual merging of cultures. Naturally, some violence occurred, but there were still families that were formed. And I think of this as what the purest form of a future Canada should have been. These people coming together, creating the Métis Nation, living together, and, integrating each other's cultures. Bannock is a Scottish bread. It's not an Indigenous bread, but we took it over. We didn't take it over, but we claimed it, right? And we look at an Indigenous culture. We have cookum scarves. We see Indigenous little women wearing these scarves over their head. Very colorful designs and things like that. Where did that come from? Those were our Ukrainian friends. Ukrainians, when they came to Canada, they were one of the few groups that traded with Indigenous people and really wanted to learn from them. So our cookums, our grannies now wear these cookum scarves, and it's Ukrainian tradition. So we see this melding of nations, and that those little things, those little clues, that I feel should have been the Canada that we wanted, but we still had the British and the French influences, and of course they still wanted their colonies, right? So, but imagine if the Métis Nation of Canada became the ruling government, right? This beautiful symbiosis and connection. I think it would be very beautiful. So 1812 in the fur trade, European unsuitable use of the land. The Europeans started just abusing the land, really. It happened. We know this. And they stopped honoring the treaties. It's sad, but when you're a colonial government trying to take over a place, the things you agreed to aren't going to be solidified. Basically, the plan was to do treaties, but then ignore the treaties after a generation, right? When the War of 1812 ended, Europeans no longer needed Indigenous military alliances. Remember, the War of 1812 is when us Canadians / British people went down and burnt the White House. So basically, we're undefeated against the United States in war. I don't know if that would be the case now, but anyway. As the fur trade dried up, Europeans turned more and more to farming. So that intensive use of land, and that means cutting down trees, that means losing habitat for the wildlife, vital winter food sources for Indigenous people, and really killing the fur trade. Even more. With all things, I feel like we overconsume, and this happens over and over in history. Fur trade dried up because we overconsumed the beavers and any other fur-bearing animals. In the United States, especially, purposely killing the buffalo. It happened here in Canada too. We see those images where there's thousands of buffalo skulls stacked up, haunting images. Why would you purposely destroy such an amazing resource? Excuse me. Eventually, there were more Europeans than Indigenous people. It just happens. More colonies, all the issues that Indigenous people had. Because we think about the millions that died, and it is pretty sad. Diseases European brought with them, right? These were diseases that Indigenous people didn't have. Now, even at a technological level that we're at right now, or thinking about alien visitors, right? How do we adapt to this new reality of pathogens and diseases that we know nothing about? So, can we really blame them for the diseases they brought? Not necessarily. But millions of Indigenous people died. More than half of the Indigenous people alive at the time died from these diseases. Entire systems of knowledge were lost as elders passed on too soon before being able to share their knowledge. Now, what we can blame is situations where smallpox infected blankets were given as gifts or traded with the support of military leaders like Mr. Lord Jeffrey Amherst, right? These sorts of things happen because they were busy trying to solve the Indian problem. Things like that can be prevented, and death toll could have been reduced. Can we say by how much? I don't know. I don't know if scientists can calculate that or not. In 1829, the last person recognized as Beothuk, as a Beothuk person in Newfoundland, died. I think this is such a sad situation, because if you go back further in history, the Beothuk were the people that the Vikings encountered in about 1000 BCE. So, when they first tried to make colonies in North America, They were completely outnumbered by the Beothuk people. And, it was like they managed to fight off the Europeans at that point. But this time they couldn't. There was too many. When you think about a Viking ship, you could only get about 50 people on one of those ships. And that journey took a long time to go from Northern Europe to Iceland to Greenland, and then across the coast to places like Newfoundland. So 50 people compared, plus their animals, compared to hundreds of thousands of Indigenous people at the time. It was a losing battle. There's just no way they could get enough ships to do that hard journey that long ago. So let's move on. There's this thing, terra nullius, land belonging to no one, and land inhabited by non-Christians could be claimed. I mean, that's diabolical. There's people here. It's claimed, right? These are traditional territories. But when the church says non-Christians, that opens up the door. Europeans expanded. Oh. Sorry, I yawned. Europeans expanded the concept of terra nullius to describe lands being used by uncivilized people, not only un-Christian, but uncivilized. And of course, Europeans defined what it meant to be civilized. And when you have a culture or a group of people that is living almost perfectly with nature and the changes in the seasons and the movements of animals, and just where certain foods are grown naturally in the wild, is that uncivilized? There's a perfect harmony with these people, and does that mean uncivilized? If anything, it's the complete opposite. The Indigenous people at the time were more civilized because they honored the land and protected the land and lived in a perfect symbiosis with the land. Now, we know this wasn't perfect. We know that when the first Indigenous peoples first came to North America and South America and Central America, there was some pretty big challenges, meaning the mega fauna and flora. I mean, if you've got a giant saber-toothed tiger stalking your camp every night, you're going to end up trying to get rid of as many as possible, right? So we can see in the history the die-off of the megafauna and flora in North America. We see that same thing happen in places like Australia, because they grew up by themselves for a long period, so these animals and plants were able to thrive because there was no top predator like humans. Europeans decided that Indigenous people were not using the land in ways considered civilized. So this is so bizarre. You're in a perfect symbiosis with the land, and someone else comes along and says, oh no, you're not using the land properly, you're not cutting down the trees, you're not digging up resources, you're not overgrowing and depleting nutrients from the soil, you're not cutting down trees for grazing land that's, unsustainable. These are all unsustainable. And how can that be considered civilized? Strange. So the music does seem a lot better right now for what we're talking about. The British North America Act of 1867. So First Nations were divided between the United States and the British Dominion of Canada. The British North America Act, also known as the Constitution Act of 1867, puts Indians and lands reserved for Indians under federal jurisdiction. Indigenous people were not involved in the creation of this law. Europeans became Canadians, but their views about Indigenous people did not change. So we see these separations, the results of this arbitrary line between Canada and the US, basically splitting First Nations in half. You have to cross an international border to visit relatives. That's insane. And, we see that in southern Alberta with the Blackfoot people, and I know there's multiples in southern Ontario, between the US and Ontario, and I think there's some in further east. And it's just, that's crazy. You just basically split up a person's homeland. I think that's where we have things like the Jay Treaty. Me as an Indigenous person, I should be able to show my treaty card and cross a land border to the US. So there should be no issue with Blackfoot people crossing from Alberta to the United States to visit family, go to the store, right? Like, this was their land before, so there should be no issue. Now, the Jay Treaty does not count for ocean or air travel, so you still need a passport to do that sort of travel. So, I mean, that's a little something with the Jay Treaty like that. So Indians and lands reserved for Indians under federal jurisdiction. This is interesting because this essentially makes Indigenous people members of the federal government, like employees, like we're part of this Indigenous department now. We're not citizens. We're not people unto ourselves. We're just part of this government department. Canada, Red River and the Northwest Resistance. Again, I spoke about this, and it's just this country could have been beautiful. This beautiful symbiosis between Indigenous people and Scottish and French fur traders that integrated into the people, the local people, right? We had the Rupert's Land sale in 1869. I don't even know who this Rupert guy was, but for some reason he owned all the land in Canada. But they sold that land to the Hudson Bay Company. The Hudson Bay Company paid the Canadian government for this land. The Hudson Bay Company didn't pay the individual nations that are on that territory. Right? No money went to the First Nations. It just went to the Canadian government. It's such like an obvious scam, right? The Métis fought for their land during the Red River Resistance and the Northwest Resistance. I prefer to use the word resistance over rebellion. In 1885, the Métis were defeated. Métis leaders died in battle, were put in jail, or were executed. You know this, Louis Riel, hanged as a traitor. After these acts of resistance and fearing for their lives, many changed their names and moved away. They basically became the road allowance people. They were given a chunk of land, but it was right next to the road. And any Métis people basically could have, it's called the script system, they could have given up their rights as Indigenous people to become full citizens of Canada. Again, another tactic to solve the Indian problem. And when you have people moving away, changing their names, things like that, it's like this mass denial of your culture and your history. And I don't blame them. You know, when the RCMP is out there trying to track you down for being Indigenous or being Métis, you don't want to be treated that way. You want to be treated like a regular person. So you have a lot of Métis people that deny their Indigenous heritage, and they can do this because they're white presenting, right? They don't look Indigenous, a lot of them, some of them, right? So they had that ability. But sadly, that still denied them their cultural history. Indian Act of 1876. So this was to assimilate the Indigenous people. In 1876, all Indigenous laws were consolidated into the Indian Act. The Indian Act completely changed Indigenous lives. European-style elected band chief and councils were instituted for all nations. Hunting and fishing were limited, and spiritual ceremonies outlawed. Now, if you want to know more about this, there's a great book on the Indian Act. Where is it? I got a link here. Right here on the screen. There's the, it's over there. The QR code. 21 Things You May Not Know About the Indian Act. This is a great book to teach you about the Indian Act and all the bad things that happened with it. I got it right here. And I've personally read the Indian Act multiple times, and everything that Bob Joseph talks about in the book, I completely agree with. So I'll put that back later. I think I put my shoulder out. So it's a good book. You might wanna look at it. I'm gonna move it off the screen now because we're sharing right now. Cultural underground. You may not leave your reserve without a permit. The local Indian agent had to give you a permit, and you had to give them a good reason why you were leaving the reserve, going to the hospital. There's just certain things that just weren't allowed. And they would give you time frame. Okay, you got 2 days, you got to be back here, right? You may not vote. So Indigenous people didn't have any sort of voting rights here in Canada as a Canadian. There was no rights. It's very similar to no rights to vote for women, because we weren't full people. You may not gather to talk about your rights. So they're preventing us from uprising, essentially. You may not hire legal representation. It's illegal for an Indigenous person to hire a lawyer to help them solve a problem in Canada, because they basically weren't Canadians. You may not practice your spirituality, ceremonies, or your traditional forms of government. So, yes, so they made us take on the colonial form of government with elected chiefs and councils. And we still all use this form today. A lot of nations, I think most nations, there are some nations that have hereditary leaders, and they kind of follow that, but it's not their official leadership. So things like powwows and pipe ceremonies and smudging and use of traditional knowledge for healing and health, and what other big things like the potlatch on the coast and things like that. They were all banned. But cultural events like that were important to Indigenous people, because if you had a powwow, you had people from all kinds of different nations showing up. It was a cultural situation where the youth could meet other youth from other nations, right? And that allowed more diverse families to form. And it was very, very important part of the culture that disappeared for a long time. Now there's a powwow trail, and you can go follow the powwow and go snagging. But talk about trying to get the Indian out of the Indian, right? You can't follow your culture or your language. If you do any of these things, you will be put in jail. Cultural oppression, trying to kill the Indian. Enfranchisement. Now, we spoke about this a little bit with the script system. This is very similar to the script system. Enfranchisement stripped some Indigenous people of their legal Indian status. This stopped land right cases from reaching the courts. I don't know why that's cut off. Oh, that's a terrible slide. I gotta update that. But because you couldn't become an Indigenous lawyer and defend your nation, because as soon as you became a lawyer, you lost all your treaty rights. By rights, because I have my management degree, in this time period, I would have lost my treaty rights. And it's interesting because I wasn't born with treaty rights. Because my mother married my father in 1975, 74 or 75. Anyway, they married. My sister was born in 73. I was born in 78. Or 75. My sister was born in 75. So I just can't remember if they married the same year. Anyway, because my mother married a white man, she lost her treaty rights. So my sister and I were both born without treaty rights. And it wasn't until laws in the early 80s came into place that my mother and me and my sister both got our treaty rights back. We suddenly became Indigenous. This policy of enfranchisement ended in 1950 after decades of resistance. First Nations teachers, lawyers, doctors, clergy members, or veterans were stripped of their Indian status. Again, this was because you're no longer a savage. You learned. Now you're not Indigenous. You're Canadian now. The urban and off-reserve Indigenous population grew. And right now, I know with my nation, we have about over 8,000 members, I think, and more than half of us live off-reserve. Primarily Edmonton and other nearby cities. I'm gonna check the chat, make sure nobody's chatting it up. So, next slide. Inuit and TB. Excuse me. I burped, sorry. Inuit communities were relocated to isolated, unfamiliar, and barren lands. And this was, they were relocated to claim sovereignty for Canada in the Arctic, to gain access to natural resources, or to be just better controlled. We gotta control those Indigenous people, those Inuit people. This had disastrous results, including tuberculosis epidemics. In 1956, 1/7 of Inuit were being treated for TB, and 1 in 3 Inuit were affected. Many family members were sent south for treatment in TB sanatoriums or Indian hospitals. Some were never returned home, and many passed away from the disease. TB among Inuit is still over 300 times higher than for Canadian-born non-Indigenous people. In the 1950s and 60s, many of their dog teams were shot by the RCMP because that was a traditional pastime and you should be working your labor job. And the Indian hospitals here in Edmonton, one of them was called the Robert Council. I've forgotten the name. It's over near St. Albert Trail near Westmount Mall in the neighborhood. Oh, bunny rabbit outside in the yard. The neighbor's yard. So this hospital basically only recently shut down. I can't remember the year it shut down exactly. It was something like the 90s. Because as a child, I still remember people talking about going to the Indian hospital. So that would have been in the 80s. So scary. They did some ground testing there, some radar in an undisturbed area. ground penetrating radar to see if there was any bodies buried there on the ground. Duncan Campbell Scott, the Indian problem. The government thought the Indian problem would solve itself as people died from diseases or were assimilated. In 1920, Indian Affairs Deputy Superintendent Duncan Campbell Scott said, "To continue until there is not a single Indian in Canada that has not been absorbed into the body politic, and that there is no Indian problem and no Indian department." This dude wanted there to be no Indigenous people. Everybody was just Canadian. They wanted us all to be equal in the guise of everybody being equal. But in Canada, Indigenous people are a different people. So they should be treated however their Indigenous government wants to treat them. The government expected Indigenous people to give up their rights, traditions, and cultural activities. Oh no. Different people living in the same landmass. How dare they? And of course, we can't talk about this topic without the Indian residential schools. From the mid-1800s until the 1990s, the federal government forcibly took Indigenous children and put them in boarding schools run by churches, run by the Roman Catholic Church, Anglican Church, United Church, and the Presbyterian churches. The official partnership ended in the 1970s, but the last Indian residential school in Canada closed in 1996. Like, that's frightening. All these Indigenous kids taken from their families, away from their cultures, taught religion that wasn't theirs, mistreated, tortured, starved, killed, died while running away, never seeing their family for years on end, basically becoming a different person. Oh, my sister says our parents married in 1974. Thank you for that update. I just couldn't remember. I believe it was a shotgun wedding and my mom was already pregnant. but yeah, my sister's birthday is in March, so you gotta go back 9 months. Yeah. Anyway, it is so sad that these children had to endure. I mentioned some of the conditions. The police took away Indigenous children. You have these murals in the paintings where the RCMP are basically stealing kids. The schools were far away, and some children stayed for months or years. Children's names were taken away, replaced with numbers or Christian names. This is where there's a lot of Métis people with French-sounding names, right? That happens. But at the same time, there's a lot of Indigenous families with French names that came from a situation like this. What's your name? They didn't know their name, so the local priest just used his last name as their new last name. Children were not allowed to, and numbers, right? Children's names were taken away and replaced with numbers. Where else have we seen in history where people were numbered, right? That's the Jews in the Holocaust. They were numbered. Children were not allowed to speak their languages. They were taught English by fluent French speakers in some cases. That's hard. Often they weren't given enough food. I heard stories about when the Indian agent showed up, the soup would actually have veggies and meat in it. But when the Indian agent was gone, the soup was just broth. Essentially, there was very few veggies and meat in it. Some were part of dangerous medical experiments without their parents' knowledge. This is gruesome. About 150,000 children were taken to Indian residential schools. This is about numbers, right? And we know thousands. I don't even know what the number is right now. It's over 10,000, I think, the graves that have been found at residential schools. The school effects. Most children say they experience very bad conditions and abuse. Many of them lost family connections and didn't learn their languages, cultures, and traditions. Some students died at the schools, buried in unmarked grave. Charles Camsell. Yes, thank you, Joy. That's the name of the Indian hospital here in Edmonton. Charles Camsell. Lost my spot. Unmarked graves. Others died while trying to run away. We know about the Gord Downey and Chani Winchak. I can't say his last name. Foundation. This is the story of Chani and how he ran away from school and died on the way home. Some students never returned home, ending up in urban centers. So that's why we have a lot of Indigenous people in urban centers nowadays, because that's where they grew up. TRC in churches. There's an image of the late, great Justice Murray Sinclair. He just recently passed away. Some survivors became leaders and activists. This was good. Canadians started learning about the residential school system. This was good. Certainly a hard time to realize that your government was doing bad and trying to come to terms with that sort of thing. Former students negotiated the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada, the TRC. For some, this marked the beginning of a journey of healing. Not everyone had the opportunity or wanted to participate in the TRC process. Who wants to share their deep hurt publicly? Right? I don't blame them. The churches helped to enforce the government's colonial policy. We learned all this. Churches helped with taking the Indian out of the child. We learned all this. Imagine being a church member trying to reconcile this. Oh my God, my churches did bad things. Not all the churches have apologized. Some have. In 2008, the Prime Minister, who actually apologized on behalf of the government, and I don't know if there's been a lot done since then. Anyway, we also had the 60s scoop. From the 1950s to 1980s, thousands of Indigenous children were taken. The 60s scoop was to assimilate. It's essentially, you're in a bad home with bad parents, so we're going to take you away. Elaine Kiknoswe, she founded the 60 Scoop Indigenous Survivors of Childhood Welfare Network. She was an Indigenous 60 scoop survivor. And I also know someone who was a 60 scoop survivor from the 80s. And Indigenous children experience discrimination because they receive less funding. Right? You're put into some sort of foster home. But if you were a white child, your foster parents would be given more money. Some families had to give up their children in order for their child to receive specialized treatments, medical treatments. And this is terrible. Imagine having a sick child and the only thing you can do is give it up to the government. I'm gonna move on from this. Basically, underfunding suicide, underfunding of on-reserve basic services, over 50 long-term drinking water advisories. I think a bunch of these got cleared up. I'm not sure how many there are right now. 1 in 5 Indigenous people lives in housing that needs repairs. High rates of health and social challenges of living in a depressed economy and not given enough funding. Right? Suicide rates among youth are 2 to 33 times higher than non-Indigenous youth. It's basically a pandemic situation where there's so many youth committing suicide. It's sad. Let us remember to, the youth who died by suicide. There's so many, and we've always got to remember them. In Canada, right, we have the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirit people. Women are targeted, the carriers of culture and the heart of a nation. Residential schools left a legacy of violence that contributes directly to abuse. Racism causes visible and invisible wounds. Right? We think about, we went to residential schools and we learned to treat people badly because that's how we were treated. 4,000 Indigenous women and girls have gone missing or been murdered since the 1970s. My sister says that the wedding was already planned before she was informed, just before the wedding, that I was attending. Meaning that my sister was in the womb at the time and would be attending the wedding. Good one. And my mother doesn't like turnips because they gave raw turnips as treats. Ew, raw turnips. Okay, I like cooked turnips, especially when they're mixed with potatoes and carrots and mashed up. That's pretty good. But raw turnips, oh my God. Is that a treat? Shouldn't it have been an orange or an apple? Or local berries, right? So, the national inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls happened in 2016. And they discovered that Indigenous women are 12 times more likely to be murdered or go missing. Insane. This is basically a race-based genocide of Indigenous people. I'm going to move on from that too. That's sad. Now, there are some modern land claims going on out there. You can see the map here. Since the 1970s, many Indigenous communities have signed land rights agreements or modern treaties. The Nunavut Land Claims Agreement is one of these. Basically forms an Indigenous-run territory, aka province, right, in Canada. Nunavut means our land in the Inuktitut language. There's a lot of people that have worked a long time for these modern treaties to get signed. Oh, where'd I go? Oh, suddenly I don't know how to use the damn thing. So, UN DRIP, this is the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Indigenous activists are working with allies, and this was a worldwide thing. The United Nations declared on the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People was passed by the United Nations, our world governing body, in 2007. It's basically a minimum standard to ensure Indigenous people survive and thrive. The UN Declaration recognizes the collective rights of Indigenous peoples. And, amazingly, but look how long it took. On June 21st, 2021, this is very recent history, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act came into force in Canada. Everyone in Canada is now legally binded to follow the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. This, if you're a business and you're working on traditional territories, you need to know this legislation inside and out to make it part of your organization. And another recent development, the Daniels decision. In 2016, the Supreme Court issued the Daniels decision. The federal government is now legally obligated to work with Métis and non-status Indigenous people to address their rights, interests, and needs. So we talk about how the Métis people lost their resistance, were scattered to the wind, hid their identities, forced to take enfranchisement through the script system and things like that. Now they need to support these people. And I think that's beautiful. Urban and culture. Urban centers have higher rates of poverty. When you're an Indigenous person in a city, you tend to be on the lower side of the economic scale. It's difficult to maintain ties to your culture if you live in a big city. But there are a lot of groups that are finding ways to celebrate their cultures in the cities. You hear about a lot of cities, powwows in the cities, or groups and organizations. I talk about friendship centers. Here's a picture of the Kamloops Aboriginal Friendship Center Society group. And Indigenous peoples continue to resist. We are Indigenous. We are here to stay. Language immersion programs and culturally based healing initiatives are being created across the country, and this is a beautiful thing. Elders and knowledge keepers are being properly honored and are becoming important again. Mothers, aunties, and grandmothers are bringing back ceremonies, especially the ones involved with women. Using the courts to have Indigenous rights recognized. This is ongoing fights. And we got to remember that the treaties are living agreements. They are real. They are alive. They're part of the Canadian history and culture and building block, but they just haven't been honored properly. And of course, Indigenous people survived centuries of efforts to make them disappear, but we're still here. And colonial governments and non-Indigenous organizations are starting to realize that there's no way around it. So I've shown you this image before. I'd created this image for this slideshow, and I think it was last week I popped it up, and we can see how Canada's actually formed. We have the land, and then we have the treaties, and then we have the equal power of all the Indigenous governments in Canada. I think it's over 400, and the colonial government, federal, provincial, and municipal governments, the way they've chosen to split that up, that's their business, but they're equal. The colonial governments and the Indigenous governments are equal in power in Canada, and that's what makes Canada. Canada is not Canada without the two sides of its people and its government. Right, sun, grass, and river, we referenced that up at the top, at the start. Treaties have often been represented as documents of the past. They're not. They're living, breathing documents. Indigenous leaders were clear that they were put in place to benefit future generations. How uncivilized of Indigenous people to think about future generations, right? As long as the sun shines, the grass grows, and the river flows. This is what the signers, the Indigenous signers of the treaty, believed. This was us sharing the land, where as long as the sun shines, the grass grows, and the river flows. You know, these are not so-called Indigenous issues, because treaty people are all people. And these issues affect everyone in Canada. The violence of colonization has left a lot of pain and shame. The relationships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples is damaged. We need to close the equity gap. We need to build respect, honesty, and trust to move forward together. And what's with the last slide? Yeah, some credits there. We'll end that. I did use the KAIROS Blanket Exercise as a reference for this, but I also put in a lot of stuff that's not on there. God, I can't figure out how to unshare. Stop sharing. There, it's me. It's big. I'm big again. So that's my presentation that I give to some organizations. You just got it for free. There's more detail. I give more detail because I'm following the card slides, the presenter slides. So that was, how long was that? That was over an hour. I was taking my time. But I think it was good. Still more, I still need to do more for it, change it up. There's maybe some recent history stuff, like how many long-term boil advisories there are right now. I don't know. I keep forgetting to check. Let me just check to see if there was any comments that appeared someplace. Got a lot of comments from my sister. Thank you, sister, my favorite big sister. for watching the show again today. I think I'm going to shut it down from there because there's no other questions or comments. I think today is a good day to mention that my sister, who's been sending comments today, she has an Indigenous craft business called Unbound Creations, and she does a lot of cool stuff. See this green dragon behind me? That's a plastic printed, oh my god, I forgot the term, the technology term. Anyway, she printed that and it moves around. It's very cool. I don't want to pull it off there today. Okay, so there. This takes you to her Facebook group where you can see the stuff that she has. You can see where she's going to be setting up her booth, and you can also connect with her and order any of her stuff. Her whole family seems to contribute, and my mother, who is a beater and moccasin maker, she contributes to some of the stuff that my sister sells, and that's awesome. Definitely go check her out there. If you want to book a meeting with me for HR, Indigenous Relations, or just networking, or maybe you want to be on the live show with me sometimes and you can talk about your business and get some free advertising, a little bit of content for your socials, go ahead, use this QR code to book a meeting for me. That goes to my calendar link, so you can book the meeting. And I'm going to change that also. If you enjoyed what you saw here today and you liked it, please give me a 5-star review. If you hated it, don't do it. But I could always use a 5-star review. I mean, in the review world, the online world, Google reviews are still the gold standard, so I appreciate a review. Anyway, what can I say? I've got my designs that I created on TeePublic, the website, if you want to check out my designs. This is one of my Truth and Reconciliation Day shirts. There are some other ones that just say Truth and Reconciliation Day, and they're orange. You can go find those. But it's t-shirts, hats, coffee mugs, stickers. You can get the design on multiple things, bags, tapestries, pillows. So if you want to support me that way, that's fantastic. And I think we're done. I think we're done for today. I'll let you go. Thank you for watching this, whether you watched it live, especially my sister Joy. Thank you. And if you watched it afterwards in the recording, please go ahead and put your comment, and I'll try to catch it for the next live. And thank you. I'm going to end this live now. Bye-bye.